Hello everybody. So for this video, I want to kind of veer the direction of the conversation into a little bit of a darker route, because sometimes in order to understand psychology and understand the human psyche and the way the human brain works and interacts with society, it's important to not only understand like the commonness of mental illnesses or some stigmatized mental illnesses, it's also very important to see early signs of some dangerous behavior that can lead to a huge ripple effect of events. It can range from, a person just simply being withdrawn from society to them acting violent towards other people. So in this video, I would like to highlight and discuss a lot of key information about and around the topic of psychopathy. So psychopathy stems from the term psychopath. In short, people usually use it loosely as psycho. And although it's loosely used, it has a very specific type of criteria to it, a specific background to it. So to begin, I would like to go over the fact that in psychology, there are these things that we call the big 5 personality traits. And the initials for it spell out ocean. So in every human being, we're measured in our personality traits by our openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then neuroticism. So those are the 5 big parts of a personality. And then on the dark spectrum of that is a dark triad. So it contains 3 different traits. And those 3 traits are Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. The things that set it aside are the fact that obviously it goes to the darker range of human psyche. And to clarify, narcissism has to do with, basically, to simplify it, it's when an individual can really be manipulative. So it can be an individual who's very coercive with their words, their actions. And I mean, we all kind of know how to persuade in modern life, but this is obviously a dark trait. So I don't want you to think that any little thing that you've tried to convince or negotiate with an individual shows any sign of Machiavellianism. It's just that when in extreme cases, it's people that take advantage of other people, in other words. They really take advantage of them, looking out for themselves only. So the funny thing is that all 3 of them, one individual cannot have all 3, yet all 3 kind of blend in together with the things that it does to the human brain, to the way it's presented, and they kind of have like a little overlap with a lot of the things that they do to human beings. So narcissism is a little bit more of a familiar term. People know what narcissists are a little bit more. I mean, it's an individual who's very self-involved, self-absorbed, with no regard to others. So you can see how it kind of overlaps a little bit with Machiavellianism. Then psychopathy is when an individual is so withdrawn from everything that they lack remorse, their intentions and everything are very callous. So it goes hand in hand because they all have no regard to humanity or society around them. But Machiavellianism, the key word will be manipulation. Narcissism, key word will be self-absorption, or, an egotistical mentality, egotistical behavior. And then psychopathy is like no empathy. There's no empathy there, there's no remorse. It's just very callous behavior. And I would like to go over this because there are certain signs to look out for if you or somebody you know may resemble these signs within somebody. And identifying these or keeping an eye for these and seeking help for it will actually, alleviate a lot of issues going on in the world. I mean, it won't stop everything, but in many cases, such as mass shootings, such as domestic violence, robberies, just assaults left and right, it all can be prevented if the individual is a psychopath and they have these little warning signs that a lot of people tend to overlook because, they're not educated on it. This isn't something that's typically talked about. The signs of a psychopath can range. So starting from the top, first of all, it can be a sense of an antisocial personality disorder. It can be just antisocial tendencies. And I don't mean antisocial in the way it's loosely used. That term is very just thrown around. But I mean antisocial in the sense of the fact that anti is a prefix to against. It's not just withdrawing from society. It's not just oh, I don't really like to interact with people. That term actually is asocial. That's when people don't like to, socialize with anybody. But antisocial means that they're against society. They're against humanity. They're against other individuals. They're against communities. So that's very important to be able to distinguish the two and to know that that term actually comes from a little bit of a more dark meaning, and it means something a little bit more severe than just you being introverted or shy or just a little bit, withdrawn from people because you don't want to interact because you get drained. But antisocial personality disorder can actually be diagnosed, or you can see signs as early as the age 11. And formally, it could be diagnosed, I believe, when you're 18, if I'm not mistaken. I'm 80% sure that that's the age. I think most disorders can't get diagnosed until the person is legally an adult. But there are warning signs. So an antisocial individual will be very withdrawn. It can be the kid who's just in the background, very quiet, but in the sense of they're not just shy, or maybe just have a little bit of a lower self-esteem, trying to get their foot out there, trying to communicate, but in the sense of they're just not interested in interacting with their surroundings. They're not interested in interacting with their teachers, their fellow peers. They're a little bit more separate from it all. So antisocial personality disorder definitely has a lot of different ways of being viewed. That's one of the little tiny signs of it. Another one can be irresponsibility. I know we all typically, the average human being, can procrastinate, can forget things. It's normal. But I mean irresponsibility in the sense of, again, it goes back to that part where they just really don't care about other people. They don't care about what their actions or inaction can have consequences upon it. They don't really care about the fact that it can have a ripple effect, that it can affect others. They'll just not care. There will be a sense of nothing there. That's one of the little things that can be there, and people typically see it in teens, which has to do with another thing, which I'll go over in another video. Teens' brains develop a little differently. During that stage, it's a very tough time, but also during that stage is when a lot of these early signs can be seen and can be misconstrued as just, oh, he's a teenager, he's acting out, or she's just acting out, there's nothing wrong with her, she's just being a teen. But some of these things these little bits of the puzzle can be really significant in preventing something. Of course, the biggest thing is the fact that they won't have empathy. They won't be able to relate to human emotions properly. They won't be able to feel any sort of relation to individuals. So when it comes to interacting with people, when they do, they won't be able to put themselves in other people's shoes. They won't be able to see how, for example, their irresponsibility or the antisocial behavior has an effect on other people. They can't get past that. Or they know logically that it's not good, but emotionally and even at a certain extent, a little bit logically and reasonably, there won't be any sort of willingness to try to connect and try to see it from their perspective. They'll just want to stick to their side and stick to their guns and not even bat an eyelash to the other direction. And back to what I was saying is that a lot of the lack of remorse, the irresponsibility, the lack of empathy can also cause the individual, when they're older, they're going to constantly seek out actions. And the main sentence in this action, which I remember learning about in my class, is that they will for more latent terms, screw people over for either profit or pleasure. So they'll intentionally hurt people. They'll intentionally put them in situations, or they'll step all over them. They'll hurt their emotions without that empathy. They don't even feel bad about it. There's that lack of remorse there, and they'll do it, for example, if it's in a professional setting or something that involves money or some sort of collateral or some sort of gain loss balance in there. They'll do what they have to do without a care in the world, or without a care to the other person or the situation, event, or organization, just to gain something from it at the cost of everybody else around them, or at the cost of the specific individual that they intentionally want to hurt. And when it comes to the pleasure side, that's a little bit more dangerous, because there isn't a need for a reward to be there. They'll be doing it for the sake of doing it. And I would like to go back to this, because the reason why I actually got inspired to do this video is because I saw a documentary not that long ago, and I really hope that it's okay for me to mention this on YouTube without like monetizing it or finding some sort of form to make sure it's not copywritten. But this is my version of doing that. It's there's this documentary series called Don't Fuck with Cats, and it's about this individual. You can look up this case, Luca Rocco Mangata. And basically what happened is that this individual uploaded a couple videos on YouTube back in 2010 where they were harming cats. They would torture these animals, these poor creatures, and a lot of people got together, and animal activists typically were the ones that were, raised red flags. So they wanted to take further action, in the sense of the fact that, it was an injustice, because I don't think anybody should be cruel to another living thing ever. And also, given the fact that this is a really big warning sign into a person already having violent behavior that can progress into something greater. And it escalated, of course. This man ended up murdering another man, and this poor man just, didn't see it coming. But thing is, a lot of these people through the internet were trying to track down who this guy was, and they were trying to track down what his motives were, and he kept taunting them by sending them links to videos that he would do. So the issue was the fact that they tried to take it up with the authorities, but a combination of everything really minimized the situation and really minimized the severity of his behavior, and the fact that he would hurt animals, and that there were little warning signs. It grew into something big, and it ended up going into the fate of this poor individual who got murdered by him. And so it's very important to know these signs. It's very important to see an individual if they're very withdrawn, if they're intentionally doing things to hurt other people without any regard. And it can escalate. So those are the behavioral aspects I just went over. But it can escalate in that overt external kind of presentation into the world. It can be in forms of aggression. For example, this person had, spouts of aggression. Whatever they were personally going through in their lives, they decided to take it out on the world rather than just deal with it the way, most of us try to do. We try to face it, try to fix it, or try to better ourselves. But it can escalate into aggressiveness. A person that has psychopathy will lash out on their teachers, they'll lash out on their parents, they'll lash out at pretty much anything whenever they don't get their way, especially. And if it escalates into violence, it'll result in forms of cruelty, and in extreme cases can be end in murder. And so a couple warning signs of a psychopath can branch out to, for example, a serial killer. A serial killer is an individual who will most certainly, pretty much 90% of the time, considering there can be other mental disorders underlying, such as schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, or some sort of learning disability. That aside, about 95% of the time, serial killers will all have a psychopathic traits. And so when they have those psychopathic traits, it'll range from them being young. have all of the other behaviors I listed. They will be, remorseless. They will be apathetic. They will be antisocial. They will be aggressive. And I want to give these warning signs because it's really important. So for a kid, a couple things, they have to all coincide together. I mean, it doesn't, one individual event doesn't necessarily mean that they have all the signs, but it is definitely something worth looking into. So one of the main ones is that they'll have all those behavior traits. A second one will be the fact that they will wet their bed. It's actually, it's common for some kids, but if they are experiencing some odd adaptation to society, or if there's some sort of antisocialness going on with them, there's aggression, there's an odd way of how they approach the world and how they treat other individuals, and it coincides with them bedwetting constantly, that can definitely be a big red flag. Another thing can be that they constantly seek a lot of cruel acts. So I know that with television and media and video games, there are violent video games out there. Doesn't necessarily mean that that person is vulnerable to the mercy of what is in those games. But if somebody already has this ingrained in their DNA, it sets a lot of alarms off, because they'll thrive off of it. They'll be pleased by seeing an individual get hurt, or to be able to commit an act where they're hurting other individuals. They'll constantly be surrounding themselves with a bunch of violent media, a bunch of violent things, and there won't be an ability to distinguish that, like, oh my goodness, like, you know what, I shouldn't be doing this. No, they know what they're doing is wrong, but they'll do it anyway. They'll find it appealing. They'll find it exciting, and that's definitely a warning sign too. They'll be seeking very weird things to look at, very weird things to entertain themselves with, like things that are very outside of what the average healthy, relatively healthy human being would look at. Another thing that escalates even more to violence would be the fact that they harm animals. It's not very normal at all for an individual to just randomly want to hurt an animal or hurt something helpless. So that's another level that it can escalate to. They'll start treating pets awfully, or just outdoor animals such as birds, rodents. They'll start experimenting with them in a very macabre way, and that's very dangerous. A lot of people will be like, oh well, it's just an animal, but that especially is the biggest red flag. Like in the case with Luca, it was awful to see this, but it was just that little thin line of what that species was that crossed over into it being a human being. And of course it escalates from there. If someone can do that to an animal, they therefore start seeking to do that to helpless individuals or helpless populations of individuals. So God forbid, they will go after individuals with disabilities that are immobile, that are a little bit more of in a helpless state. They'll be sick. A child, an elderly individual, people with learning disabilities, they can target these individuals because it jumps from that spectrum into a very dark area, and it starts going into humans, but they test the waters, so to speak, with what they can do and what they can get away with. And of course, that will end up leading to them doing this overtly to society. They'll seek out a certain population that they just want to target, and or they'll just randomly pick individuals to do this to and inflict these awful acts to. So consider all of this, and if you know anybody who has some sort of indication of showing these symptoms, it's very important to keep notice of it, because while this video isn't meant to serve as a diagnostic tool, it's meant to serve as some sort of a guide and some sort of a wake-up call if you suspect that there's somebody in your life or yourself or somebody you know that may be resembling these signs, if you see that they are showing these little facets of behavior, these random acts, it's important for you to reach out to a mental health professional, get them to seek help, because there's a possibility that there may be hope for them, before it escalates into the further steps that I recently mentioned. Try to seek help for them. There's a lot of different centers that can do that. I know that individuals can seek, for example, law enforcement help for this kind of thing. They can reference them to the proper counselors, to some behavioral analysts, to people that investigate crime. So it's very important to keep note of these warning signs, because I feel like this isn't something that's very talked about often, and especially in the light of the fact that there are so many mass shootings going on. There are random acts of, cruelty that go around. There's a long history that a lot of people know about serial killers such as, Bundy, Dahmer, Gacy, and even fictional characters that can model those and kind of get the replication of that individual pretty accurately. Keep note of it, seek help, and know the signs. And of course, further your research. If this raises a couple different topics that you want to go through, just go ahead and deepen your research a little bit more so you can pinpoint exactly what you're facing and pinpoint exactly what type of help you need to get for this individual to make sure that nothing escalates. So I hope this was very informative. I hope this can serve, to prevent something from going wrong, because after seeing that documentary and after seeing so many true crime series and cases that go on and forensic files, all of those different cases that get thrown out there and occur every day, I think it's very important to talk about this, and I hope that this can help whoever's watching this in the long run, or at least for educational purposes, because this is something that does occur within society, and it's something that isn't talked about often, which it should be, because to acknowledge the light, you need to acknowledge the dark, and when you acknowledge the dark, you're better able to take cautionary measures to alter that into something that'll be more productive and that won't put anybody in harm's way. So please reference back to this, do your research, seek help for those who need it, and of course know that there is help out there. Seek protection if things escalate. And I hope that this served well. And if there are any other specific topics that you would like me to cover, you can always feel free to comment in any one of my videos, and I'll do as much research as possible to accumulate all of that and in the best way that'll tailor your needs. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you have a good mental health day. Thank you.